what does the FDA's decision on J&J now mean for a country that is already in a third wave? The head of the Health Justice Initiative, Fatima Hassan, joins me now to discuss this further. What does it mean, Fatima? We are in deep trouble. We've vaccinated too few people. Every time I speak to Professor Francois Venter from eNCA, he says we're almost at the bottom of the log, even in Africa. Who's responsible for all of this?
So I think, the world leaders that decided to hoard vaccine supplies and not share the technology and the know-how. But this particular situation, the one that we're in, where we don't have supplies from Johnson & Johnson, the responsibility has to fall squarely at the CEO of Johnson & Johnson. So we were made many promises. We were promised supplies and deliveries. We were told to rely on the market. We were told to rely on a plant in Baltimore that would basically send the substances over to Aspen only for a fill and finish. And we were promised 32 million dosages by Johnson & Johnson in the next few months, 200 million for the rest of Africa, and that's not going to be coming through. So we're in a real crisis situation. We have too few vaccines. Professor Venter is correct. At the moment, we can only rely on supplies from Pfizer and a drip feed of donated stock, which is called bridging stock from Johnson & Johnson that come from other parts of the world, not Baltimore, and that is the reduced figure of 300,000 doses that will be coming in for teachers, which is stock that's about to expire. So, Johnson & Johnson has to really look into themselves and, basically account to South Africa and the rest of Africa as to why they have refused to share their knowledge and the know-how. The U.S. government has to, we believe, step in now because they funded a lot of the J&J research, and you've got to scale up manufacturing. We've been warning about this since 2020, that it's not enough to rely on a handful of suppliers, because if you have the situation that we currently have now with the situation in Baltimore, you basically interrupt entire supply chains, which has a major impact on South Africa's rollout, but also on the rollout for the rest of Africa.
Fatima, were you warning this government that to put their eggs in just two vaccine baskets, especially since these are new vaccines that were manufactured or processed in double quick time for a disease? That's never happened in the history of vaccines in the world. Were you warning our government that they should look at other supply, other vaccines, not just these two?
So I think groups around the world have been warning all of their governments that the issue of vaccine selection is critical and important in a time of a pandemic, that where there are multiple safe and effective vaccine candidates, that one should be able to rely on them. The situation in South Africa is slightly different because it depends once again on the pharmaceutical companies that lodged their dossiers, that were willing to supply vaccines to South Africa. And it's why we've said that in this pandemic, a handful of CEOs of pharmaceutical companies have really been playing God. So we know that AstraZeneca submitted a dossier. Those doses were eventually not used. We still don't know the scientific basis and the reasons or the advice that was given to government, because the MAC vaccine advisory is still not public since January of 2021, or since this decision was taken. The regulator then approved Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson. So those are the only two vaccines that we can use. It remains to be seen whether SAHPRA will approve any other of the vaccines where dossiers have been submitted, including Sinovac and Sputnik, but we'll only know that in the next few weeks. So when you have a situation where only two vaccines have been approved or selected for use in your country, you have to basically rely on those companies. If those companies decide to drip feed you, if those companies decide to refuse to share the knowledge and only allow fill and finish licenses for one company in South Africa, then of course you're going to have a supply crisis, because we need billions of doses around the world, not a few millions. And so what we have is a bit of a drip feed and trickling in through the eNCA study, which was about 500,000 doses and 300,000 doses for the teachers, and a few million from Pfizer. And that's hardly enough for South Africa and also, as I've said before, for the rest of the continent.
So how do we get the country now to move back to, for example, AstraZeneca, which we know has been proven to be effective? And in fact, when we had Professor Venter on, he said that it was very effective against even the variant we have in this country to prevent death and serious illness. Should we be going back to AstraZeneca?
So that is something which I think the MAC vaccine advisory has to advise government on, and the scientists and the experts who are basically looking at the data have to provide scientific advice on, what South Africa's vaccine selection should be. With the current situation that we're in, what we should be demanding is that Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer start issuing multiple licenses, stop hoarding the knowledge, and stop blocking the waiver. Because if we can have a relaxation of the intellectual property barriers that are basically blocking up the scaling of manufacturing around the world to benefit South Africa as well as, other parts of the global south, then we would be in a different situation. We can't rely on some charity from the Biden administration or from the G7 that's meeting this weekend. That's certainly not going to be enough. It's not a sustainable way of managing a pandemic. So how do you get billions of doses into the system? You do that by scaling up the number of manufacturers that would be allowed or permitted to basically make the vaccines. If these companies continue to refuse, if Johnson & Johnson continues to refuse, for a country like South Africa, given that our entire rollout is now in peril and at risk, then I think we have to start taking compulsory measures against these pharmaceutical companies.
And what are those measures, and who should be taking those measures?
So in respect of a company that is unable to meet supply and refuses to share the technology and know-how in a public health emergency, our government certainly could start taking the necessary steps to invoke compulsory licensing mechanisms to compel the transfer of technology and know-how. But in this case, the U.S. government funded a lot of this research in relation to Johnson & Johnson. It should be marching in. It can definitely take certain measures to compel the manufacturing know-how be shared with as many different companies as possible. I mean, it just really doesn't make sense that Aspen, for example, only has a fill and finish license. They should be given a full manufacturing license. There are at least 5 other companies in Africa that could be doing this as well. So the status quo and the systemic issues and the trade barriers and, the conversation that are happening at the G7, not with the entire world, but with a handful of richer nations, means that we have a lot of barriers in front of us, but we're going to have to fight back and insist that these companies actually share the knowledge now. It's, the situation that they've created of artificial scarcity should be and can be addressed, because this is not how we're going to get out of this pandemic.
Fatima, my time is up with you, but just one quick answer. Who in our government is responsible for getting what you are saying should be done? Who should be doing it now?
So definitely our Minister of Trade and Industry and Competition and the President. But we have a command council that has been established during the state of disaster, and we expect the council to meet on an urgent basis and now to take the necessary compulsory measures.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And we know who now should be accountable for going in and pushing really hard to get Johnson & Johnson and others to release not only more vaccine, but allow us to manufacture them in our own country to save the lives of our people.